So, Andrewism has made a video about religion from an anarchist perspective. I've written on this topic in an article published on the website Red and Black Anarchists. You can find the link to that in the description. So, as an anarchist, also interested in the topic of religious studies, I want to respond to the video because I have some big disagreements with it. So, let's dive in.
Before anyone gets nervous, let me be clear, I am not trying to start a cult, I'm not trying to sell snake oil, and God did not tell me to have multiple wives. But when I look outside my window, part of me wants to weep at the beauty of the natural world. I have the grand fortune of greeting forested mountains every morning. On most days, the skies yawn before me with brilliant brushstrokes of white amongst the blue. I'm blessed to see all sorts of birds visiting my neighborhood, from the quarrelsome grackle to the conversational kiskadee. When I behold the brilliance of nature, I can understand the impulse for religion. As the naturalist John Muir wrote, in our best times, everything turns into religion. All the world seems a church and the mountains altars. Religion plays a crucial role in societies across planet Earth, for better and for worse, shaping how people perceive each other, organize politics, and interact with the natural world. Although secularism has gained significant ground over the past century, the persistence of religion, in various forms, cannot be understated, particularly where religion intersects with capitalism, statism, racial hierarchy, and perhaps most infamously, patriarchy. But what exactly is religion anyway? How has it affected the way we relate to nature and each other? And for people fighting for the present and future, what role might religion play in our lives? Anarchists have long proclaimed, no gods, no masters. But is there still room for religion in anarchy? Should we start our own solarpunk religion? Questions, questions, questions.
And at least one of them, Andrew won't be answering. He doesn't actually attempt to deal with the issue of how religion should be defined in religious studies. He kind of just collates a couple definitions from the internet, including from Wikipedia, and basically says religion is that stuff that has to do with like worship and ethics and the divine and stuff. Um, and that's not a helpful definition of religion. You're not really isolating what particular features of a belief system or set of practices makes them religious. That's the point of this question in religious studies of how to define it, and that's why it's a difficult question to answer, which is why there are a bunch of different definitions for religion, as Andrewism says. Um, Andrewism, as English speakers, I think we all have an idea of what religion is. Um, but Andrewism set out to define it, to make it clear what he's talking about, which I think was a good thing to try to do, but then he doesn't define it. So that was kind of pointless.
And with my limited answers, I have no doubt that we can have a reasonable conversation about one of the least controversial topics in human history. Let's start by defining religion. There is no uncontested definition of religion. Encyclopedia Britannica calls it human beings' relation to that which they regard as holy, sacred, absolute, spiritual, divine, or worthy of a special reverence. Wikipedia defines religion as a range of social cultural systems, including designated behaviors and practices, ethics, morals, beliefs, worldviews, texts, sanctified places, prophecies, or organizations that generally relate humanity to supernatural, transcendental, and spiritual elements. Religion may involve gods and spirits, and guide interactions with human communities and the natural world. Special texts may be upheld as holy, and special people may be upheld as authorities. Some religions emphasize right behavior, others emphasize right belief. Considering the range of things involved, perhaps you can see why religion is so hard to delineate. It overlaps with much of what makes us human, how we see the world, what we value, and what we do in our day-to-day lives. That trifecta aligns with author Mark Green's definition of religion in Atheopaganism, which we'll return to later. Religion is a combination of cosmology, ideology, and practice.
So he does get someone else's definition, I suppose, as food for thought. He doesn't really tell us whether he specifically endorses that definition or not, or whether he's just using it um, as a sort of toy definition that one could have to illuminate things. Um, but that aside, this definition is very bad. So, um, cosmology, putting aside scientific cosmology, in particular, cosmology referring to the belief systems of human beings, um, has to do with one's model of the world and one's place in it and the meaning that one derives from one's place in the world. Now, that isn't anything particularly religious. Um, so, if you're going to include cosmology in the definition, then you need to have some other stuff that's more particularly religious. Because, yes, religion is a form of cosmology, but it's not just cosmology generically. Atheists have a cosmology, non religious people have a cosmology. Um, but the only other items that this definition adds is ideology and practice. I assume practice is just a vague allusion to the fact that people do things in the name of religion. Um, that's as best I can glean from all that Andrewism says in this video. Um, and so that doesn't tell us anything distinctively about religion. And the other one is ideology. And not only is ideology not inherently religious, atheistic anarchists like myself, for instance, we have an ideology. Any atheist or non-religious person with political opinions, they have an ideology. Um, uh, so, not only does that not tell us anything in particular about anything specifically religious, but ideology is predated by religion, right? Ideology is a modern phenomenon. Ideology, in the context of politics, doesn't just mean like one's worldview. It in particular means a vision of the problems with the existing society and a program for the exercise of human agency to transform society into a more ideal state. And that is a feature of modernity, because in the ancient world, people largely viewed their place in nature and in human society as fixed. They thought it was dictated by spiritual powers and by the forces of nature. And so even when you had political philosophy, for instance, in ancient Greece with Aristotle and Plato and so forth, that was more just ethics about government or the organization of communities. There was not a program for the transformation of society into a more ideal form. Um, so basically, this definition tells us nothing about religion and misleadingly conflates religion with ideology. So this is like not only does he not give us a definition really, but also the definition that he does cite, at least to give us something to think about, that he does cite at least to give us something to think about, is bad.
Cycle of samsara, the dualistic war between good and evil, and the belief in any form of afterlife fall under cosmology. What is believed about the nature of the universe. The values of a religion fall under ideology. These are principles that guide your behavior, from the Golden Rule to the Law of Moses, as well as what may be considered sacred or profane. Rituals, prayers, rites, festivals, and so on fall under the practice of religion. As Green describes, one of the reasons religion persists is thanks to the way humans process and interpret information. Our brains are wired to recognize patterns and log memories. These memories may be of direct sensory experiences or the imagined experiences of dreams, hallucinations, and stories. We use these memories to navigate the world, but our memories are not as reliable as they may seem. Our ability to discern real memories from false memories is pretty weak. Our brains will often emphasize information that reinforces what we already believe and discard the rest, a phenomenon known as confirmation bias. When you add the cultural conditioning of religion, which may normalize the belief in the supernatural through stories, people will see support for their beliefs no matter what. Religion manifests in vastly varied and surprisingly similar ways across continents and cultures. I'm speaking from the perspective of someone with an intimate, lifelong knowledge of Christianity, though I've deconstructed, as well as some familiarity with Islam and Hinduism. That's just living in Trinidad. But long before Christianity, Islam, or Hinduism ever emerged, there was and remains the diverse set of beliefs, values, and practices held by ancient and contemporary peoples that are now grouped under the anthropological construct of animism. Modern Homo sapiens have been around for roughly 300,000 years. For most of that history, we've had a fairly intimate relationship with the rest of the biosphere. When discussing animism in Less is More, anthropologist Jason Hegel pointed out that the same way many of us today can recognize and remember facts about the brands, celebrities, and politicians of our media landscape, early human societies would have been able to name and describe hundreds, if not thousands, of plants, insects, animals, rivers, mountains, and soils. These humans would have understood that their existence depends on the well-being of the biosphere. There's only so much we can know about their beliefs, since they don't exactly fossilize. But they may have seen common traits and even kinship with the rest of the living and non-living community, and thus developed moral codes that would guide their interactions with these systems accordingly. This is the way of seeing the world that anthropologists call animism.
Okay, so animism is the view that essentially everything in nature is living. That life is a fundamental aspect of the natural world. That's what animism is. I'm not even sure. He doesn't even really define animism. He just starts talking about how indigenous people interacted with the world and then says that's what animism is. I mean, no. Animism, specifically, animism is the view that, um, uh, natural objects are suffused and full of life force and life, right? Yeah, that's what animism is.
In Beyond Nature and Culture, anthropologist Felipe Escola recognizes that contrary to our contemporary separation of humans from the rest of nature, in many regions of the planet, humans and non-humans are not conceived as developing in incommunicable worlds or according to quite separate principles. The environment is not regarded objectively as an autonomous sphere. Plants and animals, rivers and rocks, meteors and the seasons do not exist altogether in an ontological niche defined by the absence of human beings. Animism emerges from and reinforces the mutualistic and commensalistic relationships that humans develop with our fellow organisms. As described by anthropologist Samuel Miller MacDonald in Progress, ecology identifies three notable kinds of relationships between organisms: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. In mutualistic relationships, organisms benefit each other. We provide hives and protection, while bees pollinate crops and produce honey. In commensalistic relationships, one organism captures energy from another, while doing neither harm nor good to the other. Lots of animals and plants make their home among trees, while neither harming nor helping the tree itself. Finally, in parasitic relationships, one organism captures energy from another to the other's detriment. Like the mosquitoes that may suck your blood with deadly consequences. So mutualism co-benefits, commensalism coexists, and parasitism deprives. Beyond organism to organism relations, MacDonald applies this framework to an organism's relationship with its environment. Human individuals and societies may form mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic relationships with the ecological systems they inhabit. And animist societies generally engage in commensalistic and mutualistic relationships with their environments. For animists, all creatures and things are ensouled, having personhood, from animals to plants to rivers to mountains. In MacDonald's words, An animistic world is vibrant and full of life. The forest, a bustling city of creatures with unique and mysterious minds, a universe populated by millions of interiorities. As the scholar recounts, for example, among the horticultural Achua people of the Amazon, plants and animals are seen as relatives. Plants are children that must be mothered to maturity, while animals are the brothers-in-law the men hunt with respect and circumspection. I can already hear the objection that some of the indigenous or prehistoric societies that are usually considered animist have also done harm to their environments and even caused extinctions. This is true. When expanded into new territories, many groups did damage the wildlife populations they encountered. Perhaps most infamously, human arrival in North America and Australia coincided with the extinction of several megafauna. MacDonald also recounts the Austronesian peoples that decimated native species on many of the Pacific islands they set foot on. But though it came at a profound cost, they eventually learned to stop exploiting those places and develop beliefs and practices that integrated their societies within the limits of the island's ecosystems. They would still fish, hunt, gather, and farm, but sustainably, in the spirit of reciprocity and respect. Which is just a sensible thing to do. Our health and well-being, along with that of countless species, depends on how our human systems materially relate to natural systems. Animist beliefs thus provide a useful society-wide guide for beneficial behavior. And yet, animism is not the widespread belief of our times. So how do we end up here? Animism was displaced in much of the world, and now our societies are not primarily mutualistic or commensalistic in relation to the rest of nature. Our material relation with the biosphere is primarily parasitic. This is thanks in part to the catastrophic rise of states and development of dualism. Just to be clear, what follows isn't an exhaustive history of every religion and state, but an incomplete overview of where some of the dominant worldviews we inherited came from.
So a big problem with the video here is that, at least the narrative that the video is putting forward, is that it essentially says that the move from stateless indigenous societies, which didn't have much negative impact on the environment, um, uh, and the fact that those indigenous societies were stateless and didn't have that negative impact. All of that's explained by the fact that they had an animistic worldview, and we today have a dualistic worldview. Now, let's put aside the issue of dualism. We're going to get to that in a second because I really don't think he knows what that is. But putting aside that just for now, it's just incorrect to say that the reason that indigenous societies were less environmentally destructive and didn't have states and divisions between rulers and ruled is because they were animists. The reason that they differed from modern societies in those ways is because of their material development, the technological development of the processes of social labor in those societies, right? So in modern societies, and even actually going back to the first agricultural societies, the impact on the ecosystem is much bigger, right? Because human beings are actively transforming the biosphere because we're able to settle land, plant crops, domesticate animals, and then eventually develop huge industrial projects and infrastructure and so on and so forth. um, so that's why the impact on the ecosystem was way less in hunter-gatherer societies, not because they were animists. um, and they didn't have a state or a division between a ruling class and the class under the ruling class, the oppressed class, however you want to put that. They didn't have that division because they didn't have social stratification. There wasn't any significant monopolization of the processes and resources of social production to empower one group to rule over everybody else. Um, it's not that they were animists and animism is good and whatever we have now, which you're calling dualism, which we'll get to that in a second because you know that's not what dualism is. But it's not that they had animism and that was good and whatever we have now is bad. Like that's not. It's just vulgar. Like I don't know what to say.
In Worship and Power, anarchist Peter Gellerloos highlights how early states relied on religious and ritual authority to consolidate control. Early hierarchical religions were born among certain sedentary agricultural communities to legitimize authority, patriarchy, and state formation, while stateless peoples, whether mobile or sedentary, retained their decentralized animisms, heterodoxies, localized deities, and non-hierarchical pantheons. State religions went in the opposite direction. From Mesopotamia to the Andes, religion became centralized at monuments, pyramids, and temples, which attracted followers and coalesced a professionalized priestly class, and in some cases, priest kings. Divine symbols and rituals were created around these sites to solidify their authority. Writing and number systems were used to support state administration, commercial record-keeping, and symbolic architecture. They elevated certain deities as supreme above others, while elevating certain human rulers as supreme above lesser rulers. Maternal, genderless, and hermaphroditic earth mothers and great spirits were replaced with father gods in the spiritual order, just as men were elevated above women in the social order. Spiritual, political, and commercial power went hand in hand. Statist societies fomented the erosion of animist beliefs and in many places favored dualistic beliefs. Dualism can mean many different things, but I want to focus on the mind-body dualism and human-nature dualism that has come to dominate our vision of reality. Historian Carolyn Merchant argued in The Death of Nature that for a long time, animist ideas had curtailed people's behavior towards the earth. The image of the earth as a living organism and nurturing mother had served as a cultural constraint restricting the actions of human beings. One does not readily slay a mother, dig into her entrails for gold, or mutilate her body. As long as the earth was considered to be alive and sensitive, it could be considered a breach of human ethical behavior to carry out destructive acts against it. As Hegel notes, this doesn't mean that people didn't extract from the land or mine the mountains, but that they did so with decorum, limiting how much they took and treating it as one might treat a gift. But the religions of kingdoms and empires split the world in two, with a spiritual realm of gods separate from and above the material realm, and with humans privileged to rule in that realm. This is human nature dualism, and in stark contrast to animist beliefs, it is the idea that humans are elevated above the rest of the living world. This notion is most apparent in the Abrahamic religions, where humans are made in the image of God and given stewardship over creation. This idea later served capitalism, which arose in Christian Europe, as it bolstered the belief that the earth could be considered a stock of natural resources for humans to parasitically exploit. Although dualistic ideas have existed in various forms elsewhere, the dualism that reshaped the globe is largely rooted in Abrahamic and especially European Christian intellectual traditions. Now, this idea wasn't strictly religious. Today considered one of the founders of the scientific method, 16th century philosopher Francis Bacon pushed a worldview that recast nature as something mechanistic, unruly, and feminine, something to be subdued by man's science. But the 17th century philosopher René Descartes was the figure responsible for the full-fledged formulation of this nature as object philosophy, as identified by Hegel in Less is More. Perhaps best known for his line, "I think, therefore I am," Descartes argued for a strict separation between mind and matter. This was the foundation of mind-body dualism. Humans alone were said to possess both minds, or souls, and bodies due to our connection to God. All other creatures were mere matter, automatons with no mind, spirit, or agency of any kind. So when Descartes was dissecting live animals, including his wife's dog, he could dismiss their cries as simple reflex. Descartes' dualism directly contradicted the animist belief in the continuity between humans and other beings. Humans became the only subjects, and nature was reduced to objects. This shift helped justify the enclosure of common land. Enclosure, in turn, helped people internalize the dualist view by cutting them off from the living world. Nature became property to be owned and extracted for human ends. As 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote, "As far as non-humans are concerned, we have no direct duties. They are there merely as the means to an end. The end is man." And speaking of man, dualism could be used to justify the extraction of women's domestic labor, as they were cast as closer to nature. African and indigenous peoples were also cast as part of nature, objects rather than subjects, which legitimized the enslavement, dispossession, and exploitation that defined the age of colonialism. As part of their so-called civilizing mission, colonizers sought to eradicate animist beliefs in colonized populations. Dualism would be instilled as the mental foundation for capitalist expansion. In Decolonizing the Mind, author Ngugi wa Thiong'o noted, colonialism's most important area of domination was the mental universe of the colonized, the control, through culture, of how people perceive themselves and their relationship to the world. Before industrial capitalism, peasant life was marked by seasonal rhythms, community festivals, and slow-paced work. But European elites demanded a more disciplined workforce. If Descartes' dualism meant that the body could be treated as mere machinery, then it could be re-engineered for compliance and productivity. Grinding centuries of industrial labor and cultural conditioning would thus produce the ideal worker of today, one who is expected to suppress pleasure, spontaneity, and autonomy for the sake of production. And now, as Hegel observes, we are all heirs of dualist ontology. We can see it everywhere in the language we use about nature today. We routinely describe the living world as natural resources, as raw materials. Dualism runs so deep that it wriggles into our language even when we're trying to be more conscientious. The very notion of the environment presupposes that the living world is nothing more than a passive container, a backdrop against which the human story plays out. These are thought patterns I'm still trying to unlearn. The fall of animism and rise of dualism has coincided with our separation from our ecological kin, a wound it will take time and effort to repair.
So mind-body dualism is the view that the mind and the body are two distinct kinds of things. That's basically what it is in philosophy. Um, there's all kinds of nuances, but that's just the basics, right? Um, Now, as Andrewism pointed out, animists believed in a spirit realm that and in spirits which animated different creatures, including human beings. So they were mind-body dualists. They believed that there was a separate spirit realm where spirits that animated living bodies and animated features of nature could go. These spirits could go to different material bodies. So the idea that they weren't dualists is just wrong. Like, I mean, I guess there's this need to say, oh, well, the stateless indigenous people, they're stateless and indigenous, so they must have beliefs that are better than ours today. Um, but I mean, I don't know. That just seems like rather unrigorous and silly to me. Uh, within animism, there's the basic distinction between the spirit world and the bodily world, the material world, as we would understand it today. Yes, animists didn't have this objectification of nature that we do in our culture, but that's not because we're not animists. It's because, and we're dualists instead of animists or whatever. It's because our culture is dominated by the capitalist world economy. We have a commercial culture. They don't, or they didn't. Um, so yeah, I mean, we I don't really see why we need to constantly be valorizing the beliefs of people because they happen to be stateless indigenous people. I think that's a silly game to play. Andrewism himself doesn't really play it because, except for in with this narrative about dualism, because he goes on in the video to say that he doesn't accept animism, basically. So, you know, Um, I mean, yeah, this division between animism and dualism is completely artificial, philosophically speaking, at least.
But the problem of dualism is not my only issue with religion. And although my critique centers on the mainstream Abrahamic faiths, especially Christianity, many of the concerns I'm about to discuss appear in other religions as well, though I know they may not appear in all. I'm speaking of the religious tendencies toward authority and superstition. As an anarchist, I'm opposed to all hierarchies and authorities, along with their justifying dogmas. That includes religious dogmas. I don't care if any system that privileges some individuals, groups, or institutions over others. That includes priests, churches, and temples, as well as certain castes or races. I don't believe in anyone having a right above others to command obedience and control resources. That includes supposedly God-ordained kings, slave masters, patriarchs, and capitalists. These concepts of hierarchy and authority are baked into so many of the religions at the center of people's lives today. The word hierarchy is literally derived from religion. People reference celestial and ecclesiastical hierarchies as justifications for hierarchy being the natural order of things. Deference to authority often leads to accepting the unscientific or prejudiced views held by leaders or texts without scrutiny. I saw it all the time in the church I used to go to. And religion bears significant responsibility for the dominance of patriarchy over women and children around the world. But in my subjective experience, it has become a taboo among some anarchists to speak openly about this. Out of a genuinely noble desire to respect others and a sensitivity to the history of religious prejudice and persecution, some anarchists have gone completely silent on the subject. But for as long as there are religions that uphold these oppressive systems, there must be those brave enough to confront them directly. Ideas are not beyond reproach just because they're religious. I know there have always been religious anarchists. I'm aware of the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish anarchists. But the existence of those well-meaning yet marginal strains does not erase ongoing centuries of scriptural and actual authoritarianism. Now don't get me wrong, I may not see eye to eye with the religious anarchisms, but I don't have an issue with them as long as they're truly committed to the struggle against authority. However, Zionism, jihadism, and Christian nationalism are not going to be defeated by pointing to a few charitable or liberatory scriptures as the real interpretation of the religion. These are movements which further fuse the existing connections between religion and politics. They should not be treated as solely religious or used as a justification for dehumanization, but a strictly political analysis is incomplete. Beyond authority and its consequences, there's another problem I see in many, though not all, religions. The way they cultivate superstition, which I find seriously harmful. Seeing supernatural explanations for everyday occurrences is not harmless. Strong commitment to belief in unprovable claims regarding gods, spirits, or angels can have an impact beyond one's personal religious practice. It can reinforce harmful cognitive biases and compel motivated reasoning, making people more likely to accept other claims that fit their religious political identity and more resistant to correction. It becomes easier to absorb partisan misinformation and dismiss the science around public health emergencies and climate change in favor of divine destinies, spiritual warfare, or an imminent end of the world. For some of the religious people I know, all of this mess in the world was prophesied anyway, so there's nothing to be done. In some cases, religious identity can override scientific literacy, even among the highly educated. I'm against superstition because I believe in seeking the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and even if it means that I can't find comfort in confident claims about the unknowable and not yet known. There was a time during my deconstruction from Christianity when I wanted to get involved with pre-Christian African spirituality, particularly the Orisha. I wanted to decolonize my mind and connect with the practices of my ancestors. But while there's a lot to appreciate about Ishise, I love learning about its cosmology, I can't make myself believe something just because I think it would be cool if it was true. The same goes for other animist beliefs. While I may appreciate some of their values and practices, I can't adopt their cosmology as truth. And yet, despite the problems I see in so many religions, I still understand the appeal. Religion meets social and psychological needs that the scientific method can never meet, like a sense of safety, belonging, meaning, and self-expression. Religion gives people ways to deal with the problems in their lives, like grief and adversity. According to Pew Research, in many countries, actively religious people are more likely than their less religious peers. They describe themselves as very happy. This doesn't mean that the irreligious are incapable of happiness and can't find things like belonging and meaning outside of religion, but there's reason to believe that religion is a useful tool for filling the gaps in people's needs.
So the big problem I see here is that for whatever reason, Andrewism has failed to engage with the part of the anarchist and socialist tradition, which you might describe, taking a phrase from Marx, as the criticism of religion. And I see this as a broad sort of trend in different activist circles, people who accept socialism or accept anarchism, um, who uh, want to sort of put aside, as Andrewism did at the beginning of this, the earlier ideas of no gods, no masters, or the critique of religion as um, a tool of control of people's minds in class society. Um, Partly, I think, because of, as he said, discrimination against religious minorities. Islamophobia is a big problem in the post 9/11 world, just for an example. Um, and also, I think, because there's this sort of weird pragmatism that goes into some activist communities. Um, oh, we don't want to address those big, unwieldy questions, just sort of put that to the side. Um, but unfortunately, I don't think it can be put to the side. Partly for some of the reasons that Andrew is cites with regard to the way that religion influences people's minds. But look, it's not just because religion could possibly influence people to be discriminatory or authoritarian or dogmatic. It's because religion has a social function, um, which is problematic from the point of view of anarchism, and from the point of view of socialism more broadly, which is that religion um, is principally exists to have human beings um, make themselves obedient to imagined spiritual or supernatural powers. That's the point of religion. Look at any religious text. The point is to do what God wants you to do, to worship God, to align yourself with karma, insofar as karma is seen as a supernatural force, um, to make offerings to the gods, etc., etc., etc. Right? And that's why religion becomes baked into the sort of power structures of modern society, and to the bigotries and dogmatisms that pervade modern society. Um, because, teaching submission to the supernatural, to the unseen, is a very good way of controlling people. And there's this sort of inbuilt tendency towards appointing a specific group of people to speak for the supernatural powers of the world, or power. Um, and the way in which that's problematic from the point of view of anarchists or socialists is that anarchists and socialists want a society of total material and mental freedom for human individuals. We want a society of free associations between corporeal human beings. And we can't have that if we're all considering ourselves subservient to powers above the material world. The two things just don't go together, right? And so it's for this reason that, for instance, Bakunin writes God and the State, and his critique of the state is enmeshed with his critique of religion. Or it's for this reason that Marx talks about the criticism of religion being the gateway to the criticism of existing society. Um, and to the point about religion meeting people's needs, it it doesn't so much meet people's needs. What it does is it helps people live in a terrible world. In a world of injustice, it's much easier for many people, probably the majority of humanity, um, to um, uh, believe that there is a another plane of existence, that this unjust world isn't the only world, that there are in fact powerful beings in this plane of existence that have human interests at heart. Um, and so that's why everybody, that's why, not everybody, but that's why the majority of people are still religious despite all of this scientific progress that has made atheism and materialism viable ways of looking at the world. Um, and at least that's the anarchist or the socialist analysis of religion. And so, yes, religion does fulfill people's need for psychological comfort and security, but it does so because they live in an unjust world. The point of anarchism or socialism is to create a just world, to make this world just, and not to leave things up to the next world. Not to assume that there is a next world to leave things up to. Um, and so, ultimately, I don't think this question of trying to, marry anarchism and some form of religion is can be answered in the affirmative. I don't think it's possible. Now, what I will say is that anarchists will not should not be hostile to religious people, and they should be for religious freedom. Not only because anarchists uh, wish to get the masses on their side, and wish to empower the masses, but also because anarchists believe in freedom, and that includes freedom of conscience. Um, but ultimately, anarchism and religion, there's a conflict there, and arguably, the success of anarchism means that the need for religion um, disappears.
especially in our increasingly alienated world. So what is to be done for people like me who cannot accept a supernatural cosmology, but still see value in some of the principles and practices of religion? Can there be a religion without gods, spirits, or any other supernatural cosmology? For the latter question, the answer is a resounding yes. Religious humanism is one such approach that integrates humanist philosophy with the rites and activities typical of religion. Among Unitarian Universalists, you can find atheists that embrace a deeds not creeds approach to religion focused on furthering social good. But my interest in this topic was reignited by the work of Mark Green. As he has argued, there can be a religion beyond gods that brings it into alignment with science, while satiating the deep human yearnings that science cannot. It is possible to drain the bathwater from around the baby, as he says in the foreword to Godless Paganism, to feed both heart and head. Remember his definition of religion? It's a combination of cosmology, ideology, and practice. What is believed about the nature of the universe, what are the principles that guide behavior, and what are the activities that define the religion. Green's proposal is a form of religious naturalism that he calls Atheopaganism. Let's take a look. Since Atheopaganism is a naturalistic religious path, its cosmology is a basic scientific understanding of the universe, which evolves as we gain new knowledge through scientific discovery and analysis. Atheopaganism treats the natural world as all that exists, so there's no afterlife, before life, reincarnation, souls, or supernatural entities of any kind. There are 4 pillars within Atheopaganism: Life, beauty, truth, and love. Life and the systems which support it are sacred and must be protected. Beauty, which inspires joy and reflects creativity, is sacred and must be cultivated. Truth, which is necessary to acknowledge harms and right wrongs, is sacred and must be sustained. Love, which can drive our kindest impulses and uplift us in the darkness, is sacred and must be nurtured. Atheopaganism also has 13 principles, but I've grouped them into 3 simple ideas: knowing, relating, and doing. First, knowing. Through skepticism, curiosity, and perspective, myths and profound experiences can inspire us without literally being true. The metaphorical is not literal. The subjective is not objective. Knowledge is never finished, both of the world and other people. And sometimes the wisest response to the absurdity of life, including ourselves, is laughter. Second, relating. We practice reverence for the earth. Humility reminds us who we are in the context of humanity and the universe. We may have special knowledge, talents, or skills, but that doesn't make us better than anyone else. And in the grand scheme of things, we are temporary specks in the light of the cosmos. So we treat each other with inclusiveness and compassion, actively counteracting the human urge to other those who are not like us. Not every opinion should be treated equally, but every person should be treated as an equal. And we act with legacy in mind, knowing our choices become the inheritance of future generations. Finally, doing. We begin with gratitude as a skill we practice by noticing and appreciating what enriches our lives. With freedom comes responsibility to others, human and non-human. And freedom brings pleasure, which is good only when it causes no harm, respecting safety, consent, and mutual agreement. We carry ourselves with integrity, being honest about our mistakes and true to our word. And of course, there's the praxis principle: planting gardens, gathering in community, engaging in ritual, and creating art. So we've gone over the cosmology and ideology of Atheopaganism. What remains is its practice. This includes rituals, rites of passage, and yearly observances. Ritual is an important part of the human experience. It's a way of processing important moments in our lives, experiencing interconnectedness, and living a more enriched life. Individually, rituals can put us in a ritual state, marked by intense present moment focus, heightened sensory awareness, reduced self-consciousness, and strong feelings of enjoyment and capability. But rituals can also offer the valuable experience of collective effervescence, the feeling of unity and joy that arises when people come together with common purpose, a feeling found in concerts, sporting events, and worship services alike. Creating an effective ritual is much like cooking. There's a science and an art to it, a framework and a fluidity. The ingredients of an effective ritual are symbolic actions, meaningful objects, and a clear structure and theme. Atheopaganism offers guidance, but the specifics are really up to you. You can create your own rituals. Ritual is grounded through sensory elements like candlelight, music, or scent that reinforce bodily awareness, immersion in the physical world, and appreciation for aesthetic beauty. Ritual works best when it sincerely engages the whole person through movement, dance, drumming, singing, chanting, and tactile experiences. Such experiences can achieve collective entrainment, an almost magical group experience of physical and emotional synchronicity through rhythm and repetition. In addition to more frequent group and solo practices, Atheopaganism suggests rituals for birth, coming of age, gender transition, graduation, moving, marriage, childbirth, divorce, elderhood, and death, depending on what's relevant to your life, of course. Many of these are beginnings and ends which rituals can help us process. For yearly observances, Atheopaganism is oriented around the seasons. For those of us living in the tropics, the 4 seasons are not quite as relevant, but there's room to adapt based on your biosphere. Atheopagan observances include the warm communal gatherings for winter solstice, celebrations of rain and preparations for the future for river rain, sowing the gardens and celebrating playfulness for high spring or vernal equinox, celebrating love and fertility for May Day, celebrating the longest day of the year for summer solstice, partaking in handicraft and physical work for summer's end, enjoying the bounty of the earth and of labor for harvest or autumnal equinox, and honoring the elderly, the ancestors, and the dead for Hallows. I don't currently have rituals like these in my life, but it's beautiful to think about how I might texture the year with more rites and observances in my calendar. And if this resonates with you, you don't need to adopt a whole new religion. You can start much smaller by creating a moment of ritual around something that already matters to you. Last thing to note, there is no room for hierarchy in Atheopagan practices. People may take on coordinating roles when the situation calls for it, but no one is elevated above another. There is no structure that enables abuse and protects abusers. No priests or priestesses, no gods, no masters. In the words of Green himself, just we critters, equal and humble under the gaze of the sun, working together to make our way. In my view, Atheopaganism has a compelling combination of cosmology, ideology, and practice. I'm not at the point of calling myself Atheopagan or consider myself religious, but it's something that I continue to reflect on in the context I find myself in. I exist in a post-colonial reality that is still defined by racial and religious division, status oppression, patriarchal conditioning, and capitalist and imperialist exploitation. I see the climate catastrophe unfolding and the system in polycrisis. Perhaps these times call for a new animism, one that recognizes the interdependence of all life on Earth without compromising a scientific cosmology. A value system that will uproot the colonial, dualistic thinking that has thingified the Earth, as Aimé Césaire observed, and made it ripe for exploitation. Humanity must reunite with the rest of the community of life through the practice of reciprocity, and discontinue the systems that see ourselves as separate from it. The authoritarianism and superstition of past religions may be supplanted by new paths, Atheopagan and otherwise, that embrace the values we hold dear and fulfill our yearnings for community. A new religion is not going to solve all the problems in the world. It may flavor a solarpunk world building with its values and rituals. It may even inspire individuals to gather and organize in a compatibly anarchist fashion. But I don't mean to suggest that we treat the plane of religion as the be-all and end-all. Religion is just one dimension of a multidimensional struggle. We cannot ignore the material conditions alongside the spiritual convictions that bind people to their faiths. Still, even as an intellectual exercise, this video has helped me to process my thoughts in a way that has given me greater clarity in how I understand and engage with the world. I hope it's done similarly for you. Whatever you believe, beliefs matter. They continue to shape our struggle for freedom in the 21st century. The path you choose is up to you. All power to all the people. Peace.
So, my final thoughts will be this. I'm just not sure why we need all this extra stuff. Like, why do we have to entertain animism or attempts at humanistic naturalist religions, which, for reasons I sort of stated just now, I don't think are even coherent? Um, why do we need all that when we have anarchism? Anarchism provides you with a view of the world. It provides you with a view of the world in which human beings, as corporeal social animals living in a natural environment, in a large material universe, can influence the course of that universe's development by intentionally transforming our relationships to each other towards a world without domination and premised on free association. Why do we need anything more than that? I mean, look, if you want to engage in rituals, you can. Either rituals in the sense of you like uh, burning incense or something like I don't you fine. But why do we need some larger overlay on top of anarchism? I don't get that. If we're subscribing to anarchism, then it seems that we are going to subscribe to an anarchist cosmology. I don't know why we need anything to supplement that. It's just I don't know. It's very strange. There's a lot of I think unnecessary eclecticism in especially a lot of these internet radical activism spaces, and I don't think it's very helpful to be completely honest. So if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. Again, check out my article on anarchism and religion, posted on Red and Black Anarchists, link in the description. Also, check out all the other great articles on that website. If you support content like this, you